I'm pleased to announce that I have today published the guidelines for the Incentives for Job Makers Act, which became operational on 1st January 2012. The guidelines answer 17 anticipated questions, including but not limited to an explanation of the benefits and when they take effect, where the application should be submitted, the criteria that companies must meet to obtain the concessions, the criteria that an employee must meet to be considered for exemption from needing a work permit and in the future to be eligible for a permanent residence certificate. It also includes a description of the process once applications are received and where the queries should be directed. Job creation has been an overriding concern of the government and is at the forefront of any legislation that we table to encourage investment in Bermuda. This act represents a first step in our commitment to strike the right balance in providing an enabling environment for the private sector, to create new jobs for Bermudians and to maintain the existing ones. Already there has been a great deal of interest expressed by companies and senior executives that are already in Bermuda and potential investors that are interested in coming to Bermuda. The Incentives for Job Makers Act 2011 also recognizes and rewards those companies that have demonstrated that they believe in Bermuda and Bermudians by providing their senior executives with an exemption from requiring a work permit for as long as the executive continues to be employed with the company and the company continues to invest in Bermuda. The guidelines will be sent to the employer groups today and will also be published on our government website. We've also consulted with the affected departments that will be impacted by this change to finalize the internal procedures. This is to ensure we're ready to accept and process the applications. At a time when businesses are seeking to realize cost savings and looking to jurisdictions that will provide them with the greatest return on investment for their shareholders, we certainly have a responsibility to provide added value. The government appreciates that in order to encourage job makers and future investors to commit to Bermuda in the long term, we must give them the opportunity to consider Bermuda as their permanent home for themselves and their families. This act is a 21st century solution to address a challenging 21st century economy and is the first of many new initiatives that will be introduced to add economic value and drive further development. I would like, in closing, to do two things. One, to acknowledge and thank Ms. Leila Medeiros and Mr. Brad Kading of the Association of Insurers and Reinsurers, and Ministers Miners and Parent Chief, who are here today, are part of the committee of three of ministers. One who's responsible for immigration, i.e. the Honorable Wayne Parent Chief as the Minister for National Security. One who is responsible for work permits, i.e. the Minister for Economy, Trade and Industry. For what they will be doing, we do as a sort of collaborative when we process and review applications. I'd also like to acknowledge Ms. Azar, who is certainly going to be the key person who will be sort of the receiver of the applications. We do have the copy of the guidelines to distribute to you. It's going on the website probably as we speak, so that those who wish to be able to access them can pull them down. And it certainly is useful in terms of setting out what the process and the procedures are. But I certainly wanted to, before we sent them out, to also give a sort of prelude by talking to yourselves as it goes out. Thank you.
Madam Premier, we have come a long way, you and I, since you stood in that very spot and introduced us as the Minister of Home Affairs the government's work permit policy. This is somewhat of a watershed moment when you look back at how far you've come.
That's a very interesting question, and it's an intriguing one, because what I would say is this is probably immigration, home affairs, term limits, almost like you say, taking it to the next level. Because what was probably useful about what was crafted in the initial policy was that it always had the exemptions with regard to key employees, and you also had the ability to have exemptions from term limits. What this is recognizing the economic times we're in and recognizing that to make sure that we provide and continue to provide incentives for those companies who are here, we're certainly saying to them that we wish you to continue to stay in Bermuda, notwithstanding that we're going through some turbulent economic times. That's what we're saying. So we want to make sure we preserve existing jobs and also serve as a spur to create new jobs. And what we're also saying, equally importantly, to the people of Bermuda, is that part of a government's role, especially now, is to create a sense of hope and also to have a plan and to let people know that you are continuing to keep people in the picture. So what we're saying to those companies who wish to apply and who may be deemed eligible once they have applied in terms of meeting criteria is that we're saying there should be no glass ceilings for Bermudians. We're saying that there has to be some skin in the game that we provide as a government, but you also have to partner with us. And that is by making it an inviting place for Bermudians, even as we are making it an even more inviting place for you. So we're saying to you that you have to have certain criteria in terms of not being a company that causes the honorable minister who has responsibility for labor challenges. In other words, you must have a good record. You also must have a good record on human rights. You must also be facilitative and have Bermudians at all levels. By that I mean senior, middle, and at the top. And also you should provide development opportunities for Bermudians, and also this shouldn't preclude entry-level positions. So we're saying in terms of term limits, in terms of immigration, we're saying that at that time in 1998 we were wise enough and prudent enough to provide carve-outs, but we're saying that we're taking it to another level, especially since we are living in some unprecedented economic times.
Any other questions?
Yes. Premier, you think these incentives will be enough to sort of keep at bay the Cayman Islands threat that they want to get, sort of lower businesses?
I think that it is never one piece of legislation that is enough for a country to continue to be competitive. I think legislation and a country's policies must always be ready to, I suppose, continue to evolve, and you can't just fire using just one prong. So I think this is part of a raft of initiatives and policies. I don't think, if even one is to read some of the recent publishings, I don't think Cayman is the competitor. The world is Bermuda's competitor. That's where we have to continue to outdistance ourselves. It's a very challenging global environment, and we have to be prepared to show that we're going to do what it takes in order to be competitive as we operate on the world stage. Whether you look at the islands to the south, whether you look at those to the north, it's everywhere is grappling for its piece of the pie. And Bermuda has to continue to reinvent itself and to also be nimble and innovative. So this in and of itself is important. It sends a strong message, but it doesn't suffice in and of itself. Because if that's the case, we'd be being very complacent. And we don't have that luxury. We really don't. We don't.
Any other questions?